Hello, this is Unexplained America, and I'm your host, Lisa. This week, I'm discussing spontaneous human combustion, like the origins, myths, cases associated, and quick business. Go follow on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Like and subscribe. We're on all the channels, YouTube. And then to further support the show, you can click in the notes and join the Patreon. So you get tons of bonus content. There's I don't even know how many episodes out there, probably 15 to 20 bonus episodes to listen to just on the Patreon. And also, we have merch. I have merch on the website, unexplainedamerica.com. So tons of ways to support the show and me, and I appreciate it. Now, to kind of get started with this week's episode, when I envision spontaneous human combustion, I envision something absolutely horrendous, like a body just exploding, like something maybe that happens in one of those horrible, Final Destination kill scenes, just gory and terrible and gross. Like it's just hard to imagine in real life something like this happening. However, there have been cases over the centuries of mysterious deaths where people are found completely eradicated in a puddle of nothing more than like ashes, maybe like a single limb or limbs left, maybe an ankle, a foot, and nothing else, like absolutely nothing else. They're disintegrated. So my question is, how did this phenomenon even get a name? Like I wanted to look at the origins. What are the origins? Where did this happen? Where did this begin? So we're going to go way back in time like we do and start at the beginning and kind of do a brief history of such. Now, the first alleged case of spontaneous human combustion, before it was even given that name, so the first alleged case of combustion, before the name was even given, was an Italian knight named Polonius Vorstius, and he lived in Milan. Now, not to be confused with the Polonius in Hamlet. Evidently, the two are intertwined, but they are not one. So this knight, Polonius, was said to enjoy the drink. He enjoyed drinking. He enjoyed hanging out in establishments with drinks like taverns and such. That was like his thing. The stories state that in the 15th century, actual year notated as 1470, it said that on one evening, Polonius was drinking, and he drank like a huge amount of wine. And then he vomited up flames and then burst into fire himself. Yes. Now, these reports also state he really enjoyed singing while he drank, and then he also loved the ladies. So it was like a trifecta of liquor, ladies, singing. Yes, he probably would have loved karaoke. So these reports, do not state whether he was extinguished, whether he lived or died, whether he was killed by this. I mean, it kind of sounds like he burst into flames and he died. That's what they allege. So I don't know for sure. I'm going to assume that he did, but it's not absolute. And again, the word spontaneous combustion was not even a thing at this time. The actual verbiage does not originate, with this Polonius story until about 300 years later. Still Italy, or connected to, which is interesting. Now, a noblewoman named Countess Cornelia Zangheri Bandi was 66 years old. This is another instance, and she's living in Italy in around 1731. And it's said that she too, like Polonius, evidently loved drinking, and she really loved drinking brandy. And she also enjoyed food. So, yes. So one evening she enjoyed a really large dinner where she had quite a bit of brandy like with her dinner. And evidently the meal, afterwards, the Countess didn't feel well. She felt, quote unquote, dull and heavy. And so she actually went up to her bedroom, and her maid went with her, and her maid just stayed with her for hours. Evidently they spent hours just chatting and praying and hoping the Countess would feel better. Well, finally, the Countess falls asleep. The maid slips out. Now, the next morning, the Countess doesn't make her way up at her usual time. Like, she's not up and around. So her maid is said to go check on her. So she goes and checks on her. She goes upstairs. She opens the door to the Countess's bedroom, and she finds the Countess's room is covered in black soot, but not all of it. Like, there's just black soot in the room, but a lot of the furnishings are nothing like normal. Now, as for the Countess, all that her maid finds is just a pile of ash about 3 to 4 feet from her bed. And there was, however, like some body parts of the Countess still there. There was 3 of the Countess's fingers and then a portion of her skull. In fact, her skull was said to have shrunk, like it was a shrunken, quote unquote, version of her skull. And then her lower legs from her knees down, and her legs were like still wearing the stockings. Like, she still had stockings, clothing like on her legs. Now, this is what's left of her. This is it. The rest of it is completely to ash, the rest of her body. Now, it's said that her bed, again, it's like 3 or 4 feet from her bed was just this pile of her remains. But her bed, her sheets, her, whole bedding chamber, those were all undisturbed, like totally undisturbed, totally fine. Now, there was a greasy, smelly, quote unquote, gluish layer of something covering the floor. They, of course, have no idea of what. This is the 1700s, early 1700s. They have no idea what happened. There was not like a fire or anything to kind of represent like how this happened. They had no idea how this happened. This was a total mystery. Now, in 1746, a man named Paolo Raleigh, he was actually a poet. He was an Italian poet. He was an opera writer. He was just all around an academic guy. So he actually went to London. He was Italian, and he is a fellow at the Royal Society in London. And this society promotes science and its benefits. It's about knowledge and learning. So yes, just all about anything academic. Now, he reads and translates an article that he finds about the Countess's death, and he is said to create the term spontaneous human combustion. And this term, the definition, is a pseudo-scientific concept describing a person's body bursting into flames without an apparent external source of ignition, often leaving a severely burned torso in undamaged surroundings. So, after this time, in the 1700s, there are multiple studies. There's articles, there's publications, there's a back and forth on spontaneous combustion. There are fictional accounts like Charles Dickens. He writes the novel Bleak House, and he discusses a character in the book, which I've read Dickens. Great Expectations. I did not read Bleak House myself, but he describes Mr. Crook, and he dies of spontaneous combustion in the novel, which the novel was written in 1852, in that time period. It's very prevalent, like 1800s, just the discussion. Now, in the 1800s, the characteristics of people being affected by, and I'm going to shorten this just to combustion, were 1, victims who are chronic alcoholics. 2, they're usually elderly females. 3, the body has not burned spontaneously, but some lighted substances come into contact with it. So they were thinking, okay, something, because, it's the 1800s. Normally there was a fire from some source, whether it was for the purpose of heat or cooking or whatever. Now, 4, the hands and feet usually fall off and thus are left behind, is what they're thinking. And then 5, the fire has caused very little damage to combustible things in contact with the body. 6, there is a residue of great ashes and an offensive odor left behind. So these were kind of the 6 things associated with these cases. And again, people would study these cases, go back and forth, whether they believed, what they believed of these cases, because they were truly indescribable. So there is a case, kind of the first case I'm going to mention. It is in America. So it is the case of Mathilda Rooney. And this happened in 1885 in Seneca, Illinois. It says late one Christmas Eve night, again, 1885, in the small farming town of Seneca, there was a woman named Mathilda Rooney, and she burst into flames. Now, it says that Mathilda was alone in her kitchen when this happened. It said the fire quickly incinerated her entire body except her feet. So her feet were left. Now, this incident also claimed the life of her husband, who his name was Patrick. And it said that Patrick died because he suffocated from the fumes. It's just saying that he was in the house, he was in the other room, and that he died because he was, just asleep maybe in the fumes, the smoke. So this tragedy, when found, left investigators completely baffled. They could not see anything about foul play. The Rooneys had been relaxing and evidently drinking heavily that evening. They were drinking whiskey. Now, one of their farm hands had spent several hours with them. He had not noticed anything out of the ordinary. There was no source of an ignition found, for the fire. It was totally just nothing to kind of have this happen. Obviously, these flames had been intense enough to reduce Mathilda to ashes, and there were only a few fragments of bone left. These flames did not spread to the rest of the room. So there was no evidence of fire to any portion of the room other than what she was around her body. Now, the fire seemed to have started literally in her body and were confined to her body. After days of investigating and looking at every option, the investigators do decide that the Rooneys fell victim to spontaneous human combustion. Completely rare and enigmatic, and just a phenomenon that they couldn't wrap their heads around. Now, as far as, again, the scientific community, and this was the 1800s, a lot of people, the late 1800s, they didn't feel like this was kind of questionable on a scientific level. However, the moral community, like the community at large, felt like, okay, these victims, they seem to be alcoholic, overweight, kind of happening to females. So it was kind of almost looked down on, like if anyone was to die of spontaneous combustion, it was just, well, they were a heavy drinker, they were heavily overweight, they weren't living the best lifestyle, and it was almost like a victim type shaming situation. And the newspapers always spoke down on these people. Now, on the flip side, and they just assumed that the alcohol was like the flammable substance. So the alcohol in the blood was part of the reason for the spontaneous combustion. So the alcohol was the factor. Moving forward many years, another case, a more well-known case, happens again in the United States. It is the case of Mary Hardy Reeser. Mary was a 67-year-old widow. She was living at this time in St. Petersburg, Florida. So she had actually grew up, was from Pennsylvania. She had lived in Florida for 4 years when she was in Pennsylvania. This is a shout out to my Gilmore Girls people like myself. Mary was a member of the DAR. So, yeah, interesting. But anyway, so she was in Florida. She had moved there, she had a son. His name was Dr. Richard Reeser, and he was a prominent physician in St. Petersburg. So when his father had died, he moved Mary down. And so she had been living there for about 4 years. And he had helped kind of set her up in a very nice, she was living in a very upscale, said to be modern apartment in the northeast section of St. Petersburg. Now, this new setup, it was actually 4 apartments and then 1 hotel room. And they were called the Alamanda apartment building. And at the time that this happened, which was 1951, so only Mary and her landlord actually lived in the building. So they were the only two in there. And her landlord was a woman called Pansy Carpenter. And this was located on Cherry Street. Mary's apartment was a 1-bedroom. It had a living room. It said it was an electric kitchen, which was very modern for the time. It had a tiled bath and a garage. Again, this is 1951, so this was very modern and convenient for the times. So around 5 a.m. on the morning of July 2nd, 1951, this was a Monday morning. Now, Pansy woke up to a dull thud sound. That's how she described it. She thought it was a door closing. And remember, she does live in like this apartment building that she owns and where Mary is living, okay? So they're kind of, they are close here. Now, she steps outside of her apartment and she doesn't see anything, but she does smell smoke in the air. Now, her thought was that she had like an electric pump in her garage that it had some issues. So she actually goes into her garage, she turns off the pump, and then she goes back to bed, okay? Around 6, she is up, she grabs her newspaper, and she notices that Mary wasn't up. And normally, by the 6 a.m., she could hear Mary's radio. She knew Mary was up by then, typically. But everything was silent. Pansy just kind of shrugs this away, like she doesn't think about it. Now, at 8 a.m., a Western Union messenger boy, he arrives with a telegram for Mary, and he actually comes to Pansy's door by mistake, and she's like, I'll take it. I'll deliver it for you. Now, a little side note, this telegram was actually from a friend of Mary's in Pennsylvania confirming travel plans. And I couldn't tell if the plans were Mary traveling to Pennsylvania or if the friend coming to Florida from Pennsylvania. But they were about these plans. Now, she went to Mary's door, Pansy does, and she pulls the handle, and the door is flaming hot. Like it is hot to the touch. She is shocked. She cries out for the boy. He's already walked away, so he doesn't hear her. Now, there were some painters kind of working right across the street, so she yells to them to come help her, and she knew that something was wrong. Like, that was not normal. That, she knew. So Pansy runs inside her apartment and she calls the fire department. And then she also calls Dr. Reeser, Mary's son. Now, while waiting, the men that had come, the painters that had come to help her, so they look inside. I guess they look through the screen or look through the window, and they can see the bed. It looks like it was slept in, and then everything else in the apartment just appears to be empty, like he doesn't see anything. Now, the other man that was with him, he goes inside and he does notice smoke in the air, but not a fire. And then he comes upon Mary, or what remains. So all he sees is a lower leg and a foot still wearing a black slipper, just kind of by this circle of blackness. And all he can see is it looks like just black. It's soot, it's ashes. And then just this, literally a lower leg foot wearing a black slipper. That's all he sees. The police arrive, the firemen, like everybody's there. They're checking out the scene. Again, there's not a fire, so to speak. So they're, the firemen go in first, making sure that there's not flames or anything like that. There is soot, there is smoke, but nothing else. Now the police, what they find is fragments of Mary's skull. In fact, it says that her skull is the size of a teacup, it says, okay? Like everything's shrunken down, melted down almost. And then there is a piece of backbone, and that is it, other than that leg that we discussed. The rest of Mary is charred ashes. Evidently, there was, they could tell that she had evidently been in a chair. All that was left of the chair were springs in the chair. But the chair was gone. Mary was charred. It was as if they were cremated, like just cremated. Now, her apartment and furniture seemed totally undisturbed. There was a light switch on the wall that was a little bit melted, but the electrical outlets, like below, were literally untouched and working. Okay. There were candles by her window that had liquefied, but the wicks still stood straight up. There were newspapers located near the area of where, her remains were that were completely untouched. The newspapers were fine. They checked out the water heater. They checked out all of the electrical, thinking, okay, is this an electrical fire? Like, what happened here? They are baffled. The police are baffled. The fire department are baffled. They do not find any type of, accelerant or anything. So at first, what they thought, like the initial thought, was that she was struck by lightning. That was what some people were saying, spreading. That was the initial thought by all parties. Like, this must have been some type of lightning strike. Some people thought that, her body was soaked in ether or alcohol, and that's why she burned the way she did. But that was also, dismissed. Now, the police are investigating, they're working, they send her remains to the funeral home. The funeral home is baffled as well. Everyone is baffled. The police, during this time right away, they do receive an anonymous letter. In the letter, it states that a ball of fire came through the open window of her apartment and hit her. And then the letter said, "I seen it happen." And that was it. So that was what was sent in to the St. Petersburg police. The police, everybody, the fire chief, they're checking out everything. They check out the contents of her medicine cabinet. They do only find that she had digestive aids in her medicine cabinet. They do contact the manufacturers of like the living room chair to find out, more information about it. They do, confirm it was just a normal sitting chair. It was made of sterilized cotton batting, just everything super normal with the chair that was also, burn up. They do, of course, dive into her whereabouts on Sunday the 1st. So evidently she had been upset by a family matter going on. It doesn't say what the family matter was, but her son had stopped by. So, Dr. Reeser had stopped by. He had come around 8 p.m. or so. So he sees her around 8. She had also visited with Pansy by about 9. So 8 p.m. was like her son, Pansy, around 9. Now, she does mention to her son that she had 2 Seconal tablets and that she planned to take some more. Yeah, a little side note, these tablets are highly addictive barbiturates that would have been prescribed at the time for anxiety and insomnia. But this drug is discontinued. So it is not something that is prescribed at this time. But again, in 1951, it was normal, quote unquote. It was okay. And so she had 2 of those barbiturates. And again, she had 2 and she was going to take more. Now nothing, Pansy kind of noted that Mary had on her rayon nightgown. She had her black slippers on, which of course the black slippers survived on just the 1 foot leg situation. Pansy notated that Mary was docile. I mean, she had taken 2 barbiturates, so she was pretty calm and pretty relaxed. And Pansy said normal, like nothing else was out of the ordinary, so to speak. The police, of course, work the scene diligently. They collect all kinds of evidence, and they do send this evidence off to the FBI because, this is a big to-do. They have no answers. They're looking for answers any way they can. So some of the items that they send were like, they had some glass fragments. They had 6 small objects that they believed to be teeth. They had found some metal near the body. They had some fiber from what they thought was Mary's nightgown. They had their bone fragments. They had some chair stuffing, charred wood, a piece of the rug, the ashes, and then the chair springs. And the rug had one section of looked heavily soaked with like a greasy material. So this is all sent to the FBI. Now, the newspapers report Mary's case as the Cinder Woman Mystery. Cinder as in Cinder, the Cinder Woman Mystery. And even in her obituary, and talk of her death in Pennsylvania, the newspaper accounts went from Florida to Pennsylvania. This was like a national news situation. The morticians that handled Mary's body, they state they could not believe that her body was cremated like that without the apartment having more damage. They said it takes around 1,500 to 2,000 degree temperatures 4 hours for a body to become cremated. So in an oven, we're talking 1,500 to 2,000 degrees for hours to produce this type of incineration, of cremation to the body, to the remains. So this is why things are so like, what in the world? It's said that J. Edgar Hoover himself takes an interest in the case. Like, he's very like, whoa, what is this? Now, the question from the St. Petersburg police is, how could this body burn so completely and leave the bulk of the apartment intact? So this is the huge question. So the FBI, they do their testing, they review all of the items in the case, and they send back a report by July 31st. So they state they found 0 signs of accelerant used. So, nothing like, people were thinking ether, alcohol, whatever, nothing like that. They do state the greasy substance that was on the rug was body fat. They believe that Mary fell asleep while smoking in her chair. Her body smoldered, creating intense heat in one area while leaving much of the room untouched. The fire burned slow and low, never spreading beyond the immediate space. This was their conclusions. Now, the coroner, with the FBI's instructions, and then, this information comes to the St. Petersburg police, he signs off on Mary's death certificate that cause of death is accidental. The FBI felt like the wick effect explained Mary's body being gone, that basically her body ignited and her body fat was the fuel, and her clothes served as a wick, turning her whole person into a slow burning candle, they said. There was an electric clock that actually stopped around 4:20 a.m. And they think that, like, basically they took the clock. It wasn't working at Mary's, but when they plugged it into Pansy's apartment, it still worked. So that was interesting. And even though kind of the FBI explained it, but many people still could not shake their questions. Many people in the community, many people, associated with Mary, and even the police, like, they were like, why didn't she wake up? Did the pills she took really like knock her out to the point that, 0 was done, like she never cried? All Pansy heard was this dull thud around 5 a.m. And then obviously this clock goes out at 4:20. So there's still so many questions. And okay, was it really a cigarette? Did they have evidence of this, cigarette being lit or whatever? Evidently she smoked, or allegedly she smoked. So still a lot of questions. Literally a year later, people in Florida are still reporting on Mary's case. They're still weary of the FBI's decision. An article in the Tampa Times reads, "The police called Mary's death accidental and closed the case. There will be discussions for years whether the police were right." So this is 1 year later. It was July of 1952. Now, so we have Mary's case. We have Mathilda's case. So now we're going to talk about a more recent case, okay? So this reflects spontaneous human combustion and reflects that it's very much still in many people's minds in a lot of different respects. So this is December of 2010. Now, this is Ireland. I know this is not America. Don't come at me, but yes. So this happened 3 a.m. on Wednesday, December 22nd. Again, it's 2010. It's in Ireland. There is a man named Tom Mannion. So he hears a fire alarm going off, and it wakes him up. He looks around his house and realizes the alarm is not his house. Like, he didn't, nothing was going on in his house. The actual alarm wasn't in his house. It was, close by, but not in his house. So he runs outside, and he sees smoke coming out of his neighbor's house. This is a man named Michael Faherty. And Michael is a 76-year-old who lived on his own in Ballybane, which is a suburb of Galway City in Ireland. It's kind of in the middle of the country to the north shore, area of Ireland. Tom, he runs to Michael's door because he hears, he sees the smoke. He does see smoke, but he hears, the alarm, the smoke. So he pounds on Michael's door and nothing. Michael doesn't come to the door. It's locked. He can't get in. So other neighbors are hearing. They are awakening. Tom actually runs to neighbors and they call the fire brigade. Once the fire brigade gets to Michael's house, they bust down the door. They get in there. They do find that there is a fire in the fireplace and they extinguish that. But as far as Michael, they do find a figure that, it's just a charred figure, is lying on his back. He's in his sitting room. Again, he is his head is close to this fireplace where there was a fire, which they put out. They find that the fire was confined to the fireplace, that none of the rest of the home had sustained any smoke damage, any fire, nothing. Upon investigation, there was zero accelerants used. There was nothing to indicate foul play or that anyone had entered the home, to cause this damage to Michael. Now, the coroner in O'Callaghan, they stated that the only damage was to the remains. So Michael's body was pretty much just cremated to ashes, just like with the others. Now, the other damage, there was damage to the floor underneath him and then the ceiling above him. But that was it. It said the body had been totally burned. Now, in an inquest by the fire officers, they are unable to determine any cause or origin of the fire that actually burned Michael to that extent. And asked if they had ever seen anything like it, like their chief, O'Malley, he responded, he had been in his career for 25 plus years. He had never seen anything like it. He had never had a case like that, never seen anything like it. Now, there was a pathologist, a Professor Grace Callaghy. She notes that, because she looked over the post-mortem findings of Michael, and that he did suffer from type 2 diabetes and hypertension, but she concluded that he had not died from any type of heart failure. So they were looking to see if he had any type of heart attack that would indicate why he would just lay there and be burned. That's what they're kind of looking at. Now, his body, again, had been completely cremated. And because of that extensive damage to the organs, it had not been possible to determine his actual cause of death. Now, the coroner does state that he was satisfied nobody had entered or left the house. And also, the coroner knew that a fire had been burning in the fireplace in the home, but he was satisfied that the fire itself was not the cause of the blaze that had burnt Michael. This team spends a whole year investigating Michael's death. They do an inquest into his death. The coroners, the fire brigade, they all inquest this, and Dr. Laughlin comes back and states, this fire was thoroughly investigated, and I'm left with the conclusion that this fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation. Now, after this, so this is a whole year later, Michael's daughter, Marin, she states that the family was satisfied with the extent of the investigation. Obviously, it doesn't help them in their grief, but they felt confident that Michael's death was very much investigated, and so this is where they're left. With that being said, this was 2010, so this was, Michael's death is stated to be spontaneous human combustion. Now, what they go on to say, because there's a lot of naysayers, obviously, to this, they state many scientists regard human combustion as a myth, while other theories suggest that the fire is sparked when methane, a flammable gas produced when plants decompose, builds up in the intestines and is ignited by enzymes or proteins in the body that act as catalysts to induce and speed up chemical reactions. So this is one theory that scientists think, is the reason for the spontaneous human combustion. Now, another theory is that the fire begins as a result of a buildup of static electricity inside the body or from an external geomagnetic force exerted on the body. There have been about 200,000 reported cases over the last 350 years, but not all have been thoroughly investigated. So this is what they're stating as their reasoning. They're backing up their reasons for the response on Michael's death. So again, very controversial situations. So the big question, it's a scary, scary thought to even think that your body could erupt in a flame like that and cremate yourself so thoroughly. That is a very scary deal, definitely. So the question is, what do you think? Do you think it's myth? Do you think it's possibility? Obviously these people are intelligent investigators, doctors, and this is what they came up with. And then you did have on Mary Reeser's case, or the FBI, they explain it as the Wick effect. They had, quote unquote answers for it, but the public still didn't buy it. They just didn't buy it. So do you buy it? That's the question. So I have to say, after reviewing this is very interesting. All of these cases, there are so many cases. I just chose 3 cases to kind of reflect on, but it's very interesting. So I'd love to know what you guys think. I myself think it's definitely unexplained. So yes, but thank you all for listening. Please follow on all the social medias, on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. Leave a comment and a 5-star review, and definitely let me know if there's any content that you want me to look into, and I'll be glad to. So have a great week, and I'll be back with you next week. Bye.